Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is an HP Pavilion PC that I won in an eBay auction for just over £3 or $4 excluding postage. It was listed as faulty, with the seller stating that it turned on, but there were no signs of life from the keyboard and mouse, as well as no display. Despite being broken, I was hoping that something could be salvaged from this machine, especially considering that there is apparently a 4th gen Core i7 in here. Even if that ends up being the only working part, there's got to be a little bit of profit in it, right? This PC is in pretty good condition with a few marks and scratches as expected. Even from the outside we can see that the power supply has been replaced at some point, perhaps in an effort to revive this old thing, but apparently to no avail. A couple of PCIe slot covers are also missing, so there was a graphics card in here, though we'll have to make do with the integrated graphics for now, which may be irrelevant anyway if this doesn't work. Sometimes I do get lucky though, so I hooked the HP up to my monitor, connected the power and display cables, and hoped for the best as I pressed the power button. It switched off momentarily, but then booted up again. I left it for a few moments, but unfortunately the monitor never detected a signal. The next step was to remove the side panel and check all the connections and see if we can get a better idea of the specs. I always suggest testing any PC you buy before tinkering around inside it. Our HP Pavilion is pretty clean, to be honest. A little bit of dust as expected, but I have seen far worse, and I'm sure you have too if you've been a viewer of this channel for a while. There's just 2 gigs of DDR3 RAM in here, in the form of two 1GB modules, but I doubt this is how it was originally shipped from the factory, as even Windows 8, the OS it came with according to the sticker, probably would have struggled to perform even the most basic of tasks. Everything seems to be connected up, as it should be, and I knew this already, but it's nice to see that this board's power connections aren't proprietary. Some systems, HP ones included, have different power connections that might require like a 4-pin or 8-pin cable instead of a 24-pin one. You can get adapters for them, but it's just extra cost, to be honest. The board also looks to be of standard micro ATX form factor, so we could swap it out if we wanted to, but I'll have to check and see if there are any headers on here that rely on certain cables attached to this HP case. The replacement power supply in here is very basic. We don't have any PCIe cables, just power, SATA and Molex. It didn't explode when I powered it up though, and in my book that is always a bonus. So in its current state, it won't boot. I tried a couple of things. First of all, I removed the RAM it came with and stuck a single stick of crucial DDR3 in here, one slot at a time. No luck. I then added a discrete but low power GT1030 graphics card, 2 different ones in fact, a GDDR5 model and terrible DDR4 model, but still we got nothing. I then removed the power supply altogether and tried it with my Corsair RM850X in the system, just in case this thing wasn't delivering suitable power. This is so light, it's like holding a stone that I've picked up off the beach. It weighs next to nothing, seriously. Even with a different PSU, again, there was no display from the system. Now, one thing I completely overlooked, and perhaps should have checked earlier, was whether or not we actually have a processor in here to begin with. I've bought systems in the past that wouldn't boot, only to realise that the CPU was in fact missing. This board does have a built-in speaker, so I would have expected a few error beeps if this was the case, and my sudden concern was quickly put to rest with the discovery of a chip mounted atop the socket. Specifically, we have the i7 4785T. This is a 4-core 8-thread CPU, just like other i7s in the 4th gen lineup, but it's a 35 watt lower power option, and it can actually be quite desirable for some, especially those who are putting together lower power systems, or at least it would have been more desirable back in the day. But from what I've seen, it still holds its price, especially in comparison to the 4770 and 4790, which are both better options. especially when it comes to gaming. Now, I think these CPUs were mainly used in certain all-in-one systems back in the day because of their low heat and power consumption. I don't think this would have been in here originally. I'm thinking more along the lines of an i7-4790S, which is a 65 watt chip, so maybe it's a compatibility issue we're looking at. Now, with that in mind, I gathered a few other 4th gen chips that I had lying around from previous benchmark videos and tried them all in this board. The result was unfortunately the same every time, a blank screen. My suspicions were now leaning towards a fried motherboard at this point, or a partly fried board. Maybe that's why the CPU and PSU were changed at some point in an effort to try and diagnose a problem with this PC, just like I'm doing today. Now, before we yeet the board into the bin, let's try it outside of the case. I have tested this before with some other systems, and sometimes you might find that it works because there may be something in the case or perhaps under the board that's causing a short, preventing a system from powering up properly. This wouldn't be the first time that this has happened if this actually fixes our problem. Now, with this in mind, I removed the HP board from its enclosure, sat it on my desk and tried it with the original PSU, a different PSU, all types of DDR3 RAM and a couple of low power graphics cards. Still nothing, so it's got to be the board. Luckily, I have another 1150 socket board on hand, because if I didn't, we would have probably eaten into whatever remaining profit there was just buying new bits in order to test various components out. Now, I have a basic Gigabyte board here, which is nothing special, but it's currently running an i5 with no issues, so I know that it works. After swapping this out for the i7 in the HP, I fired it up, and after about 30 seconds, the motherboard booted and went straight into the BIOS. Now, this was the case whether I was using different RAM or the RAM that was originally in the HP machine, so we know that the original RAM works. The same can be said for the power supply. All the other CPUs I tested in the HP board worked in this Gigabyte one as well, which tells us that it's got to be the board that has stopped working at some point, because that wouldn't work with any processor that I put in it. The 2 gigs of DDR3 isn't worth much, nor is the power supply, and I'd probably be hesitant to sell it on as I don't really know what brand it is and I've not had long with it, but there is some profit to be had from the i7. I've seen these selling for at least £30 on eBay here in the UK. As I said before, these lower power chips, even though they are older, can still be quite desirable. Being a 35 watt i7, it's probably not up to much when it comes to gaming in 2025, and I'd probably advise against looking for one of these specifically if that is your intention. Now, I'm using it with Windows 11, which probably doesn't help either, but it is working, and after using it for a couple of days now, there have been no issues with crashing. I tested a couple of games with it, just to put it under a bit of load, CS2 and GTA 5 enhanced, whereby it will run at 35 watts most of the time, sometimes increasing to 45, but this does seem to be holding performance back. I paired it with an RTX 3060 in the system, which, because of the board I'm using, is running in PCIe 2.0 mode, but the processor is definitely the limitation here, and I wouldn't recommend a pairing like this when building a PC if you're looking to use older and cheaper parts. Still, it will be an ideal low power solution for someone out there, and I'm confident in saying that this was not the cause of our HP's problems. I did try messing with some power settings, but it didn't change anything, and I'd have to suggest going with a standard i7 4770 or 4790 if you want an 1150 chip in 2025. Now, these are pretty similar cost-wise, and if needed, you can set a low power limit anyway. So if you wanted to run a 4770 at 35 watts, you can just adjust that in the BIOS. At least you've got options. With this, you may just be pegged at its default TDP, and you could end up disappointed if you're trying to play games with it. As for our HP machine overall, well, I'm glad we were able to salvage a couple of bits from it, and while I don't think it made for the optimal conclusion, I was hoping that I would just get a bit lucky and it would work and we could upgrade it a little bit. I still hope you have enjoyed this video anyway. Thank you as always. Let me know your thoughts down below. subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.